I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, the aftermath of this year's AIPAC National Policy Conference held in Washington, D.C. Some 18,000 supporters of Israel came together to express their solidarity with the Jewish state and to hear from a series of leading figures on both the American and Israeli scene who addressed some of the most pressing issues challenging Israel today, and to call for greater unity within the American Jewish community. And this year there were some sensitive issues to deal with at AIPAC, relating in large measure to threats to bipartisan support for the State of Israel in Congress, and the extent to which American Jews who detest Donald Trump have permitted their hatred of the president to affect their judgment and their feelings about Israel. So this year's AIPAC was held under the cloud of freshman Congresswoman Ilhan Omar's silly and outrageous charge that AIPAC and Jewish money, the Benjamins, a reference of course to $100 bills, that AIPAC and Jewish money control U.S. foreign policy. This anti-Semitic canard was made all the worse when the leaders of the Democratic Party were unable to pass a resolution in the House condemning anti-Semitism, and were forced to water down the resolution to be against hate in general. And to add to the pot, MoveOn.com's call for Democratic members of Congress, especially those who are seeking their party's nomination, that they should boycott AIPAC this year, and that call influenced virtually every senator involved. AIPAC was held only weeks before Israel's upcoming elections on Tuesday, April 9th. General Benny Gantz, who is leading the new blue and white party in Israel, together with Yair Lapid, addressed AIPAC. The Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, had also planned to speak to AIPAC in person. But just as he was in the White House, as Donald Trump signed a presidential order recognizing Israel's annexation of the Golan Heights, a Hamas rocket destroyed a house in Tel Aviv, injuring 7. It was one of hundreds of rockets fired at Israel's southern towns and communities, and the Prime Minister had to immediately return to Israel and was only able to speak to AIPAC by video. Well, in this overall context, what was the mood like at AIPAC this year? And how did Jews from both sides of the aisle, Democrat and Republican, relate to one another? What was the buzz? And what were some of the outstanding moments? Well, for some answers, we turn, as we often do, to the outstanding Washington Bureau Chief of the JTA, the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, Ron Kampeas. Ron, thanks again for joining us. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Ron, given all that's happening on the American political scene, what was the mood like at AIPAC this year?
There was a certain tension, to be sure. I think there was like trepidation. If you're talking about, within the 18,000 people in the hall, whether they were Democrats or Republicans, there was a desire for pro-Israel to remain a bipartisan issue. So to the degree that I was able to attend the breakout sessions where you do hear the actual activists speak, it was interesting because the questions were, how do I talk about pro-Israel to people on the progressive side of the aisle? Because there were progressives there. There are progressive AIPAC activists, progressive AIPAC members, and it's getting harder and harder for them to make their case in their communities, particularly when they're dealing with the minority communities, whether it's the African Americans or Latino communities. So they were looking for strategies. They do detect that there is a diminishment in bipartisan agreement on how to be pro-Israel and bipartisan support for Israel, and they want to stem that.
I want to make sure we understand you. What I just heard you say was that there, in fact, was tension between Democrat and Republicans at AIPAC, and you also seem to be saying there's a new concern, which I assume you're saying you did not hear in prior years, that in some way people are worried about how they advocate for Israel in their local communities. Did I understand you correctly?
Yeah, exactly.
And when you say there was a different, the question is strategy. What did you hear people suggest from within the, especially the progressive wing of the Democratic Party? How did they express, A, their concern, and B, what feeling did you have about what they were going to do when they went back to their own communities?
Well, the way they express their concern, the concerns they have come when people in the progressive community identify more with the Palestinians as as perceiving them as a disenfranchised minority and identifying with them as a disenfranchised minority, and can especially be the case that's sharpened when you look at people coming from minorities within the United States who have been disenfranchised. Like I said, the African Americans, Latinos. And so how do you build coalitions with them was a big question. And I think that, the traditional answer by noting that Israel is a liberal democracy in the Middle East where there are no other liberal democracies or democracies at all, especially now that Turkey is becoming more authoritarian, it doesn't sell in those communities because they're not interested in a relativist take. Okay, Israel isn't so bad because it has these aspects. It has rights for the LGBTQ communities. It has it has Arab members of Knesset. They want to know how it can be better. And so the question is, how do you accommodate criticism of Israel while still promoting a pro-Israel outlook? And that's that's basically. It was prevalent certainly this year at AIPAC. It hasn't been necessarily prevalent in years past at AIPAC, but it's definitely something that's been preoccupying the American Jewish community for quite a few years.
Okay, you articulate it so well. I'm only interested in whether you heard any effective response to this dilemma. Did you hear anybody at AIPAC say, this is how you answer minorities who, for some reason now, or for reasons that they can express, support the Palestinian cause and feel Israel is the oppressor? Did anybody have an answer to that?
Oh, certainly. You have the traditional answers, like I said. It's just that they're not flying. So I just don't know whether they fly so much anymore. And they are, that Israel is a democracy. That there is there are structures in Israel to which any minority, whether they're the Arab Israelis, the citizens of Israel who are Palestinian, or the Palestinians in the West Bank can turn to, like the West Bank, like the Supreme Court, in order to get redress if they're feeling hard done by. And you also look at the progressivism within Israel, the advocacy for human rights within the Israeli community. Those are the things that people talk about, and also just Israel's per se as an advanced industrial and democracy. Those are the answers. I think what I saw was maybe trying to get at more nuanced answers, which I think, like I said, was the first time for AIPAC where you talk about perhaps there's a way to engage with Israel, to be critical of Israel, but not to go as far as the anti-Semitic tropes that as you mentioned, Congresswoman Omar has advanced, or that seem to be popular. The concern among liberal Jews here in the United States is that we don't go the way of Britain, where the Labour Party has been hijacked by what I think is probably an anti-Semitic minority within the party, but they've still become preeminent within the Labour Party, and that shouldn't happen here. So how do you stop that? How do you address that?
And did you have a sense that there were both Republicans and Democrats at AIPAC who were very disturbed by the comments by Omar and a whole series of things? Support for BDS, an unwillingness to pass a resolution in the House condemning anti-Semitism, the fact that there was an anti-BDS bill which was defeated on the grounds that it in some way was a violation of free speech, and you had virtually every Democratic candidate for president voting against it in the House. Was there a sense among Democrats that they're concerned that their own party is somehow being hijacked by the far left?
Well, first of all, yeah, I mean, Ilhan Omar was prevalent in everybody's speech, whether it was, certainly Republicans and also Democrats, whether it was Chuck Schumer or Nancy Pelosi or Robert Menendez, or they all, the funny thing is nobody actually named her from the stage, at least, but they all referred to her, and they all, whether Republican, I don't know if that's simply a congressional courtesy or not, but they all definitely referred to her. Mike Pence, and they all condemned the kind of anti-Jewish bias that they perceived in her remarks, for sure. Regarding the BDS legislation, the fact that you got 5 out of 6 of the 6. Well, actually, it's changed a little bit. There were 6 senators at the time that thought they were going to run for president. Sorry, I'll fix that. But only one of them voted for the BDS bill. That was Amy Klobuchar. The 5 others, including Sherrod Brown, who has since declared that he's not running for president, voted against it. And so, yeah, in any case, there was an effort to get around that at the AIPAC conference. They introduced non-binding resolutions that had bipartisan backing, and they included that are backed by Jerry Nadler in the House and Lee Zeldin, so a Democrat and Republican in the House, and Ben Cardin, a Democrat, and Rob Portman in the Senate. Of course, the difference between this is it's a non-binding resolution, so it doesn't have the punitive measures that that a lot of the Democrats had rejected. That actually did pass the Senate, but were nonetheless rejected by a lot of the Democrats. Mm-hmm. And that addresses the concern that they had with the punitive measures impinging on free speech. But the resolution, as it stands, non-binding as it is, does roundly condemn BDS. So that's like, I don't know, if people are going to find that satisfactory or not, but that was the way that AIPAC worked to get bipartisan support behind an anti-BDS resolution.
Okay, I understand, by the way, you're not representing AIPAC. All you're doing is taking us, you're using your eyes and your experience to give us a sense for those of us who weren't there. I want to say, though, just very quietly, I'm surprised that what you didn't hear at AIPAC was somebody say the Palestinians could, live television, so we understand why your phone rings. You all right?
Sorry.
That's quite all right. What I don't understand is why you didn't hear somebody say very quietly, look, we feel terrible that the Palestinians live how they live and under the oppression they live. Much of the oppression is coming from the Palestinian leadership, not from Israel. And if the Palestinian ever said, we're going to stop this nonsense about wanting to destroy the state of Israel, but we honestly want to live in peace with Israel, many of the problems that are disturbing other minority groups about Israel would vanish. And that in some way, and it sounds harsh, but in some way it's true, the Palestinians have brought this on themselves. And somebody has to say that. It sounds to me like at AIPAC, there were other attempts to explain the problem away, but never by saying that. Am I correct?
Oh, that was said. I was talking about, how progressives take this to their progressive people at AIPAC take this to their communities, and certainly that was, people made that case as well. That this is Howard Corr made the case in his opening speech, which always sets the tone for the conference. Howard Corr, of course, is the CEO of AIPAC.
Yes.
That the Palestinians are responsible for a lot of this. That you've got an ineffective leadership with the Palestinian Authority that still funds gives money to the families of terrorists who have killed Israelis, and you've got the Hamas, which is an eliminationist organization in the Gaza Strip that seeks Israel's destruction. And that makes peace intractable. And that came up again and again in both in the plenaries and in the breakout sessions. Absolutely. I mean the issue comes up more. I think the Israel issue comes up more because Israel is the American ally in this equation and has the closer relationship. It's the paradox of friendship, right? You expect more from your friends than you do from your
absolutely
rivals. Right.
Yes, and there is something fair about that. So again, I love the word paradox. How did people feel at AIPAC this year about Donald Trump's recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights? To what extent was that an issue?
Got big cheers. I mean, it was bizarre. A couple of moments, I think, there was almost a hesitation to give it a standing ovation. I think that they were trying to figure out where everybody was on this, but certainly by the time that Mike Pence was mentioning it, which I think was on Tuesday morning was when Pence spoke, it just got rounding, full standing ovations, lots of applause. Big, very, very, very enthusiastic.
Okay.
For that, for sure.
Okay.
And just like every Republican got up, listed all the pro-Israel things that Donald Trump has done, not just including the Golan Heights, but moving the embassy to Jerusalem, recognizing Jerusalem as the capital, pulling out of the Iran deal, defunding the Palestinians, backing up Israel at the UN. I have to say, for the first time in my life, I saw something extraordinary. Somebody came out, and the name was on the program, so it wasn't as if people didn't know who was going to speak, but somebody came out to introduce somebody, and this woman said, "I'd like to introduce," and there was a standing ovation because they knew it was Nikki Haley.
Yes.
I've never seen that. I've never seen anybody get a standing ovation before her name was actually mentioned, but so that was a first. So those things, absolutely, across the board, big cheers for those things.
Okay. By the way, she is the rock star in the Jewish community. But I'm wondering the extent to which I'm a very dear friend of JBS, Millie Maggot, who's on our board. She just lost her mother, and I was at Shiva with her, and there were many, many people there. And there were Republicans and Democrats. And the Democrats just hate Trump. And when you say to them, well, look at all the good things that Trump has done. He's moved the embassy to Jerusalem. Well, I don't really think that's very good for Israel. He recognized the Golan Heights. No, I don't think that's good for Israel. And my sense is there are well-meaning, good people on both sides of the aisle. There are wonderful Jewish Republicans and wonderful Jewish Democrats. But it doesn't seem at the moment that they want to talk to each other or that there's a place in which they can agree. To what extent was that part of the dynamic at AIPAC? To what extent did you see Jewish Democrats unable to relate to or to cheer for a Nick Haley or for the Golan Heights or for Mike Pence? To what extent was there friction? You used the word friction, but I want to know the extent to which there was real, I can't talk to you, and you're out of your mind, and you're a bad person. To what extent was that at AIPAC?
I don't think that wasn't really there at all. I mean, maybe to a little, lesser extent. I think, AIPAC is still it's 18,000 people looking for bipartisanship. And so the Democrats who absolutely appreciated those things. I don't know if they'd want to go out of that enclave and into their enclaves back home and, their blue voting suburbs and praise Donald Trump for this particularly, or they might be a little bit more opaque about it and talk about the United States moving the embassy or something like that. But absolutely there was no hesitancy to praise the president for those moves. I think that to the degree that there was dissension, it was when Republicans who spoke made an issue of Democrats. So you had Mitch McConnell, the majority leader in the Senate. You had Mike Pence saying that you referenced MoveOn's call for Democratic candidates to avoid the conference. And all but two did not. All but two, maybe two actually heeded the call. One for sure, Bernie Sanders, maybe Tulsi Gabbard, we don't know. The other were in attendance in various ways. Cory Booker gave like a rabble-rousing pro-Israel speech in a meeting he had. It's just that AIPAC doesn't like those meetings to take place on campus. So look, they took place off campus. Whatever, it's that they were still there. Nobody was actually boycotting the conference. And then so when the one time I actually heard any kind of substantive booing was when Mike Pence said that the Democrats are avoiding this conference or boycotting this conference. And then there was booing, and I think that the booing was at Mike Pence for saying that because it was a falsehood. The Democrats were not boycotting the conference. And so to the degree that there was partisan rancor, I think it was just aimed at Republicans for advancing that kind of partisanship. In terms of the Democratic speakers, at least, you didn't hear it. It didn't come out. There wasn't like you've had criticism of Trump in the past, didn't it, from Democratic speakers? I didn't hear it this year particularly. And Schumer, the point that Chuck Schumer made, for instance, was that there was there was in the last Congress, there still is a bill that would codify the $38 billion that Israel is supposed to get from the United States over 10 years into law. And it had to be re-upped. It had to be, introduced again in this Congress because it was blocked by one person in the last Congress, Rand Paul of Kentucky, who's a Republican. And Schumer said, I criticized Rand Paul. I did not blame the Republicans for one guy who was stopping this. I didn't think he represented the entire party. I criticized, and I'd appreciate that a little more from the other side. That was Schumer's point. Mm-hmm. And that's the degree to, I think, to which, in terms, at least in public appearances, to which partisanship was discussed and in a less than happy way at the conference.
Very good. But were there any moments that moved you? You said there was one surprising, something you'd never seen before. Again, before Nikki Haley's name was mentioned, everybody's on their feet. But were there either moments that, you said to yourself, oh, this is interesting, it touches me, or surprises me? Anything like that for you, Ron?
Yeah, certainly. The Israelis who come and who've lost family in the wars and who talk about their gratitude to the American Jewish community for their support. They make appearances every time. They did this year as well. That was a big deal. The support for Israelis with disabilities who are helped by Israeli technology. That was a big deal. There was particularly somebody who talked about a Bedouin researcher who talked about assistance from her research. She's a medical researcher, and she was talking about her research into diseases that are indigenous almost only to the Bedouin, and the help that she gets from the government for that. Those things are always very moving, for sure.
Absolutely. Okay, so Ron, elections in Israel take place next week. How was Benny Gantz received at AIPAC?
He was received very well. I liked him. I mean, I was surprised because, the buzz among us reporters was, why is Benny Gantz here? He should be campaigning in Israel. These people may like him, they may hate him, but they're not going to vote for him. And also we thought, that this is Netanyahu's turf, because Netanyahu is a fluent English speaker. He really connects well with an American audience. And the funny thing is, he was, Gantz was warmly received. And I think particularly part of the warmth was that they kind of miss having an erect Israeli soldier standing tall and speaking with a strong accent.
Yes.
I think that's a vibe that AIPAC kind of, they had in Ariel Sharon, they had in Yitzhak Rabin, and they've had in other leaders who have come here, and they kind of miss it.
Very nice. And what's your sense of how the AIPAC membership feels about Benjamin Netanyahu? I know he wasn't there, but he is still a presence. Even when he's not there, he did communicate by a video. But in Israel, the question is Netanyahu going to yet have another term as prime minister? Will he be able to put the coalition government together? At the moment, Ron, it looks like the right is going to have more votes than the left, and more seats than the left, and it looks like, in fact, Netanyahu will have another chance. Whether he finishes his term or not, because of legal issues, that's a separate question. But do you have any sense of how the AIPAC membership still feels about Netanyahu?
He was well received. I think it was partly marred because it was a poor video link, and so he was breaking up, and people were applauding even though they didn't know quite what they were applauding at sometimes because there was a lot of static. I think that he still has that following at AIPAC. I don't know what happens if he wins with this very right-wing coalition. AIPAC took the unusual step of condemning the Otzma party, the Jewish Power Party, before when it was able to get accredited to run for the Knesset because it's identified with the followers of Rabbi Meir Kahane, who was far to the right, is seen as a racist in Israel. In his time was banned as a racist from running in Israel. What happens if Netanyahu goes in and he has the power of that party? That's going to be interesting. Look, there's a lot of things that I think that people were expecting to happen at this conference that didn't, that might happen at the next conference. So that's one thing. Netanyahu backed by an ultra-right party. Another thing is Netanyahu having Haredi parties consolidate their power and not advancing or advancing their agenda in areas that concern Reform and conservative Jews, access to the Western Wall for organized non-Orthodox prayer, marriage issues. That could exacerbate things next time as well if Netanyahu is prime minister in a year. And finally, the peace plan. I wrote a story last week saying that the Jared Kushner drafted peace plan, which nobody knows what it is. David Friedman, the ambassador to Israel, spoke quite openly about the peace plan for the first time, I think, on the record. One of the three architects of the plan spoke about it, and he described the peace plan that I think mitigates against there ever being a Palestinian state. He's talked about Israeli security control in the West Bank as part of the peace plan. And the difficulty for that was not going to be necessarily with the AIPAC audience per se or the activists per se, but the fact I don't understand. I don't know how the Democratic Party accommodates that as a whole. Maybe there's going to be a few stalwarts among the pro-Israel faction of the party that will say, okay, for now, we don't need two states, but you're getting some of the most pro-Israel members of the party pressing the Trump administration on trying to preserve two states. You had a sort of a very polite but tense exchange last week in Congress between Nita Lowey, who's Jewish, very much came out of the pro-Israel community, very much identifies herself with pro-Israel, top appropriator, makes sure that Israel gets as much money as it needs, and she was needling Mike Pompeo on whether the peace plan includes two states. She asked him three times he would not talk about it, and then you had David Friedman essentially saying it's not going to, it doesn't look like there's going to be a two-state solution. And the Democrats are so attached to the two-state outcome. I don't know what that does to the relationship between Democrats and Israel, which was already strained, or is already getting strained, I would say. I don't think it will become absolutely strained in that case. And then, as you pointed out, there are Jewish Democrats, and so what do they do in those circumstances? That's going to be interesting.
Very interesting. It is wonderful how you can summarize the landscape here that American Jewry is facing, and it's reflected in AIPAC. I appreciate always your making time for me. Everybody I speak with, by the way, they love you on JBS. I hope people tell you every now and then you go, somebody says, oh, I saw you on JBS, because they're telling me about you all the time. So thank you very much, and Ron, I'll keep chasing you.
Well, thank you. Thanks. It's always great to be on here, Mark.
Be well. The thoughts of Ron Kampeas, Washington Bureau Chief of the JTA, the Jewish Telegraphic Agency. My thanks as always to our director, Sloan Copeland, JBS's Associate Director, Dara Golub, Editor, John McDevitt, and to the producer of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.